Welcome to another episode of Moo-hyun and Jeju, a very special one, our second part of a two-part series about the Jeju Massacre. Now, to start this episode, we're going to do things a little bit unorthodox. We'll go straight to our Jeju dialect, where we're dealing with a Jeju dialect word, I believe, is it not?
Yeah, it is. It is. And yeah, it's an important word for the 4-3 massacre as well.
Yeah, so let's go to that now. So we have lots of time to discuss the second part, all the things about the massacre that we have.
It's going to be an interesting episode. Everyone stay tuned, and we hope you take away a lot from it.
Ladies and gentlemen, for all intents and purpose, the edges of the universe are now receding. The universe is shrinking, the globe condensing, in the room in which we sit solidifying around the core nugget of truth and knowledge that will soon be placed there in a moment's time, which could birth worlds, universes, and rooms much more vast than we could ever perceive before. Because what are words other than doors to thoughts? We cannot think without them. And our usher to see greater vistas than we could ever fathom seeing before is our teacher, Moo-hyun, who's about to bequeath knowledge not only to us, but to you, dear listener, that may not only expand horizons outward, but inward, to depths unknown to our primitive selves minutes earlier. Welcome to another corner of Jeju dialect.
Wow, that's going to be longer than the lesson.
Yeah, it's getting longer and longer.
I didn't need to. I just sat here. I'm like, crap, 2 minutes, type something.
Like, I think I'm going to do the next intro. Okay, Juju?
That's fine. Yeah, otherwise I'm going to start doing like I don't know.
Good Lord.
Your introductions for Jeju dialect. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for being CarCast.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. So as it is apparent by our first segments, we are doing a special about Jeju, the massacre, uprising, Jeju Sasam, Jeju 4-3. And for today's special episode, we have a special word, do we not, Julia?
Yeah, so I try to think of any words, like relating to the uprising incident. And I thought a movie made, about the Sasam called Chisu.
Chisu.
Yeah, Chisu is potato. So, back then a lot of people had to, hide in caves, so like the only food they could, bring in with them was potatoes, basically.
Yeah.
So, a lot of people, relied on that food. So the movie, the name was Chisu, and, so I thought it would be good.
Very appropriate. Very appropriate.
Yeah.
Darryl, do you remember when that movie came out? I was living here.
Yeah, I was actually just about to look it up. I think it was 2007, between 2006 and 2007. I'll look it up.
Juju, do you remember?
It
was a while ago, 2006.
More than 10 years ago.
Yeah, at least, right? Yeah. Really powerful movie. They did back in the day when they did it, they had a special screening for the foreigners, and they had the English subtitles so that everyone on the island could come and appreciate it. It was very impactful movie. Very, very, yeah.
Yeah, I saw it without English subtitles, unfortunately. I haven't seen it with English, but it's interesting because it has both, right? Like it has also Korean subtitles because of the Jeju dialect.
Because of the Jeju dialect, exactly. Yeah, I was just thinking that must have been hard to understand, Darryl.
Well, yeah, I think I've seen it a couple times now, so it kind of helps. I remember the first time I was in a little art house theater. It's when I was living in Seoul, and I really wanted to see it, and so we went, and they didn't have English subtitles at that time. It's an art house film. Like it's really artistic. It's black and white. Very small cast, and potatoes are one of the things that they are not constantly, but often seen eating, because it's something that in the winter that stays, that keeps for
Doesn't
a
spoil.
long period of time. Yeah, that doesn't spoil that
Mhm.
easily. It's and it won a Cannes Film Award too, right? Like it was a really, really big film.
Yeah.
And I believe our the gentleman, Mr. Yang, he was in it, was he not? The man who provides music for us. He's one of the actors.
He was one of the actors. Yes.
And
Can't remember. Yeah.
yeah. And so Chisu, can you say it for us one more time?
Chisu.
Perfect. And the Korean word for potato is gamja, so it's not even similar at all. Now, I mean, if you don't mind me asking, as a Jeju native, and feel free to decline, how has the massacre touched your family, if you don't mind me asking?
So actually, I didn't know anything about it, but like a couple of years ago, I asked my mom, like if she knows anyone, who was killed by that, like in her family, and she said her oldest brother was killed at by around that time, and it was my grandfather's first and oldest son. And like the police just took him, and my grandfather bribed the police, that they can, and they actually promised that they are gonna let him free, but they killed him anyway. So
wow. Wow. Did your mom, how old was she? Did she
was
tell you that?
not born yet.
Oh yeah. Okay. Okay.
So my grandmother had to go to the police station and try to, can I say it? Not retrieve the body.
Yes, retrieve.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he had to make sure that like the body, because there's a lot of dead bodies. He had to walk around and see every one of them and make sure
to take his boy home. Yeah.
That's a similar, I mean, my wife, her I guess it would be her great grandfather, similar thing happened. They were arrested, they had to bribe land or whatever to get him back. There's a theory that some academics proclaim that a lot of the wealth in Jeju is connected to, not a lot, but some of the wealth in Jeju and some of the wealthy families in Jeju are connected to the massacre in that way.
Like the land grab.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Because, well, also like
that makes sense.
A lot of people also gave their daughters to members of the Northwest Youth Leagues to prevent them from being murdered or raped or for other horrible things to happen. So there's a lot of different types of exchanges like that to prevent, just to, to preserve, plus all the villages on the mountain, right? Like if you owned a house there, well, the band that came in, your house is gone. You don't own anything anymore, right? So thank you for sharing that with us. I'm sorry. It's everyone, like we said, it touches everyone here. So in the movie, I checked, it's much earlier. It's 2012. I thought it was, I don't know
really?
why it was, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't think it was 20. That's surprising, but okay. That's older. That's older.
And it had a budget of only $190,000 US, which is really like tiny, but it's such a powerful movie. I suggest everyone go see it. So can you use the word in a sentence for us by any chance?
Oh, yes, nobody uses that word anymore. Even my parents use it, like I don't know, maybe like 짓을 먹으라.
Eat your potato. Yeah, it's really not are many of the like vegetable words, are any of them common in Jeju dialect?
What we still use lumpi.
Lumpi?
Lumpi is radish.
Radish. Okay.
Yeah.
Ooh, yeah, moo. Yeah.
Ooh,
Yeah.
Because I've never heard of Chisu used anywhere.
Yeah.
No, that's right. Nor have I.
Huh. Oh, that's really interesting.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Juyong. This is it's great. I hope, like I said, go see the movie if you haven't. And until next time, Juyong, enjoy your safe drive home.
A safe drive home, Juju. Bye. All right, so Darryl, now we're about to embark on part 2 of our little 4-3 educational episodes.
Yeah, part 2 of 2.
Part 2 of
and
2. Mhm.
if you didn't get a chance to listen to the first one, I suggest you go back. That was covering
It's
kind
helpful.
of the first part of the massacre up until September 21st, 1954, which is when they took the ban off of the mountainous
Radius,
areas
yeah.
that everybody can now kind of go back there, and it's sort of like
Travel freely.
yeah, official end. That's
Mhm.
kind of the mark that that's the mark that the government picks, and most scholars say that's okay, that's the end of it. But as we know with most
That's the end of the
massacres
massacre,
and
right?
most things, that like, it continues, as we know,
Right.
like it's still a thing that affects today. And
Right.
we are talking about the movement to the apology that President No gave in 2003. That's how long it was from the end of the massacre, which is 49 years. So with the massacre technically ending, nothing really happened until the spring
Yeah.
of the 1960s, because we're still underneath the dictatorship of Sim Myung-ri. But when
And
he
to
was
be clear about what Darryl's saying, nothing really happened is no one's even having a conversation. The massacre is not being discussed. Even people that were involved in the massacre are not talking freely to their neighbors about it. It's very much hidden for the benefit of them, just so they can get jobs. So really, really, when we say nothing's happened, down to not even conversations on the streets.
Can I be honest with you? I bet you a lot of
yeah.
people still felt it was the same. It was still continuing, right? Like Americans were still here, police were still here. Like
how would they know? Especially in light of the fact that everyone was hiding it. How was it? Information was certainly not getting spread. So I think probably not talking about it was, preserving what was left of their, their homes, their families.
Yeah, and so nothing happened. It was the status quo. Let's not say nothing happened, because that's very rude of me. But it stayed pretty much consistent until the spring of 1960, when President Sim Myung-ri was ousted for like rigging his vice presidential election, and that
a whole
was
other drama.
Yeah, then we have like a 1 year.
That was the start of it, though.
Yeah, this was
Getting
the start
booted. He got booted.
Yeah, and people on the island now started like having this optimism, because there was a period of like pro-democracy, and so there was people trying to research about what happened, but that only lasted a year, this period of optimism, until the dictatorship of Park Chung-hee came in with a military coup in 1961, and that was it. That's when it became taboo. This is when the political and military oppression of the massacre really begins. And we see that in September of 1978, when Hyun Ki-young, who's a Jeju writer and a massacre victim, he's a massacre victim, who writes the novella Suni Samchon, which is about a man from Seoul, a Jeju native who works in Seoul, returning to Jeju for Jesa. What happens is the book is ostensibly about the massacre and includes a scene from the Bukjong massacre. So after it was published, Hyun Ki-young was detained and beaten for 3 days by the National Intelligence Services. But his publication of the book already had the impact of galvanizing. Yeah, and student movements started picking up. And
educating. Let's remember, I think that was one of the keys, because this really got taken up by the younger, it wasn't necessarily people that had a part in the massacre or that was affected per se, but it was the young people that read his novella and felt I don't know if that's the right word. If I go there, empowered, to speak up about it and then to start demanding some different things.
Well, they didn't. They weren't vocal. They weren't demanding anything. The student movements were like underground, trying to do research, and it was like a period of waiting almost from the time.
Okay.
So from 1978 to 1987, this was a period of preparation by activists and scholars who were slowly and secretly rediscovering the truths and writing stuff down and gathering evidence. And it was in 1988 when President Cho Do-won came to an end, and with it, South Korea's series of dictators, the push for truth really began on Jeju. And in 1992, March, Darryl Cave was discovered. And this cave...
This is important.
It's so important that they made a replica of it in the Jeju 43 Museum, right? Inside, there was 11 bodies, 7 men, 3 women, and a child, and they all died of asphyxiation. And the way they died was it was common practice for the military to find caves in the mountainous region because it's packed.
People were hiding. Mm-hmm.
Tons of them. They would light fires at the mouth of it, and either what would happen is the people inside would asphyxiate or they would come out and get killed. Unfortunately, these people asphyxiated, but the discovery of their bodies was proof that
finally
the rebels were not behind all these all the deaths.
I'm always still shocked at the date of 1992. I still, that date still, the fact that nobody, and if I remember correctly, and I think you wrote an article about this, if I remember correctly, it was one of the survivors that tipped the research team off and was like, hey, listen, come here. Yeah. I know about this cave. I think this might be helpful for you. 1992, their bodies were found.
I actually interviewed that man who told the researchers about where the bodies were.
The one that gave them the tip. Wow.
Yeah. And the government still tried to cover up the cave.
Mind-blowing. Never mind. And what did they do? They sealed the cave off, if I remember correctly, and they bribed. Did they bribe? What's the word I should use here? They bribed the families?
No, they coerced. They forced the families to discard the ashes of the people that were inside the cave in the ocean, so there wouldn't be any memorial site to.
Yeah, so this cave is just nothing. It's a nothing cave. Get the bodies out. Go. Yeah. Wow.
But the interesting thing is, even with the Sunni Samchal, it's too late. It's too late once it's out of
the news had started spreading. Exactly.
Yeah, and
slowly, but here we go. Yeah.
Yeah, and it would take another 8 years, but eventually the Jeju Special Act would be passed, and this Special Act is so important because it actually gave government funding and a government investigation
capacity,
into looking at to investigate, to come to the island, blah, 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 do all that, and to come up with a report. And it's kind of all bureaucratic from this point because there's a lot of haggling over who should be on the committees, who should, people,
of course.
They don't want to accept it, but eventually they do. And President Moon eventually comes to Jeju on October 31st, 2003, and apologizes at the Ramada Plaza Hotel, Jeju, for the government's massacre.
During the not anything to do necessarily about 4/3, right?
No, it was just October.
6
months after they accepted the thing. They didn't want to come on the massacre date, April 3rd, probably because it's too politically charged at that time.
Yep.
And then he did come on April 3rd, 2006, and that was the first president to come to Jeju to make an apology, to make an appearance at the event.
Respects.
And
the event, just to be clear, just for our listeners, 4/3, there'll be an event every 4/3 commemorating, the occurrence. So, and it's grown quite large over the years. So that's what Darryl's saying is this was the first time government in a government capacity came down to be a part of this.
Well, the president,
right.
And
sorry, because the prime, you're right.
Yeah, and so Moon, and then Moon comes. The next president in 2018.
the gap
Yeah.
is just but even, I mean, and then, and we'll get into this, with our interview. We're interviewing apologists to like really to break down the apology of this. But even the apology occurred, but then there is still, like the two political parties arguing over how the word should be in the official documents. One wanted to say it was still a quelling of communism versus what was the other language, Darryl? The massacre, right?
Yeah, well, or
Versus,
uprising.
Uprising.
Uprising was a big one too. And
right. So this was still going on, like, we can't use these words. We got to use these words. And then, So
and the apology is like greatly important, right? It's still, people reference it today when they talk about the massacre. But I mean, we actually have two apologists coming out who can speak a lot more about this than either of us can. So let's go to the interview now and
maybe Darryl, before we cut too quickly, and maybe just a really quick update on exactly what an apologist, because they might go into it a little bit, but let's just prep our listeners.
Well, they study apologies, political apologies given by politicians, governments for atrocities that have happened in their government's history. And they came to Jeju to study President No's apology that he gave in 2000.
And that's when you met them.
And I met them a couple of years back when they came down to talk to people about it. Yeah.
It was. So, I had never heard this term before, so I just thought it was important for you listeners to know what it is that we're about to. We've been very excited to interview these ladies. So I think it's going to be educational for sure.
To discuss more about this apology are two members of a research team behind a European Research Council funded project called Political Apologies Across Cultures. The 4-member team studies political apologies to understand essentially what they are, what they look like, how they are received, and to see how cross-cultural differences and similarities between them. The project late last month held a Zoom conference to discuss President Roh's apology. And with us today to talk more about it and their project is Marieke Zoodsma, a PhD candidate at Tilburg University, and Thia Sagherian-Dickey, a postdoctorate. So thank you all for being here with us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
So now let's get started talking about your project. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've been doing over the last couple of years?
Yeah, sure. So we are a team of researchers from Tilburg University, and it's led by Professor Marieke Zoodsma. And we are looking into political apologies, as you say. And particularly my side of the research is looking into the expression and the reception of apologies. And this is a bit based from the idea that you see that there is a rise of apologies. This is also that we have captured in that database that you can find on our website, but we've created a database in which we collected apologies across the world. So these are apologies for human rights violations offered by national leaders. And we were interested in this because you see that they're more prevalent. And we wanted to know, is this really the case? How do these apologies look like? For what kind of human rights violations? And what do people actually think of apologies? So that's sort of the basic premise.
Really, really cool work. Yeah, really very, very fascinating.
And for those just listening, that was Marieke Zoodsma. And if you do look at your website, which is fascinating, I suggest everyone to do it. You can literally see on the timeline the collection of all the apologies and how there are so many more now than there was before. And then you can click on the different countries and see when they were, and the fact that they are accumulating, it leads you to think that we're in an age of political apologies, which is fascinating. Now, where did the idea come from? There must have been a eureka moment, I would imagine, that someone sitting around a table would come up with this idea to start categorizing and looking at them. No?
Yeah, I mean, I think that eureka moment is when Juliet, our professor, came had. I think, I don't know. I think that's based also on just her interested, or our interest in like what happens after violence, what happens after conflict, after tension has happened. And there are several ways to deal with the past, as they say, and apologies are one of them. And I mean, they're interesting, right? Like, there's no, in essence, you don't really get anything like physically or materially. They're just words in a way. But you do see that they're on a rise, and you do see that people really value an apology. So I think that was also her interest. I don't know if you have anything to add, T. But I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think there, especially with this recognition or this increase in the number of apologies, I think there are various scholars around the world who study this, and they have kind of coined the term and used the term age of apology. So it makes sense that then you would want to have some sort of database or a categorization. Yeah, I would actually love to go back now and ask Juliet, you know, our principal investigator. So when was that moment when you thought we need to have that? Because there have been other databases on a smaller scale, and I think Marieke and Juliet used that as a basis to start from and build the database that we have now.
How many countries are a part of it, Thia, right now? How many countries have you guys categorized in total?
I don't remember.
Yeah, we have about 75, I think, now. Yeah, and you see, and that's the thing, because they say there's a universal trend, which was also something we wanted to look at. Is this really universal?
Yeah.
And you can see that it's not necessarily universal. There are countries that have not apologized. Take, for instance, China, or countries in the Middle East. You've also seen there are countries in South Africa that have apologized, but there is large, particularly a number of countries that haven't. So it's not necessarily universal. What is interesting is that there are certain countries that you wouldn't expect it from that do have apologized a lot. People say that Japan, for instance, haven't apologized a lot, but we have captured many apologies from Japan. The thing is, though, that what's actually in those apologies is often not satisfactory for victim groups, and that makes it problematic.
Exactly. I think that's one of the biggest tensions between Japan and South Korea, for instance, is that these apologies are not exactly what people were looking for. Yeah.
Exactly.
Is it fair to say that these countries that are apologizing, are they mostly democratic countries? Like, what do you see when you look at all of them like that?
Yeah, you can see that most of them are countries in transition to democratic countries, or neoliberalist countries. So already democracies that are working on their sort of coming to terms with the past. So you can clearly see that that's a trend within the age of apology. Yeah.
And certainly for when we jump into Jeju, that was certainly the case here in South Korea, based on the governments that were in place before that just were disregarding, completely ignoring, and then finally when that power was taken away, when the military coup and all that was gone, and then it was really elected, then the president was like, well, maybe now's the time to do this.
What is something interesting that you learned from, like, that you wouldn't expect from learning about all these different apologies? There's got to be something that sticks out to you. It's fascinating work.
Yeah, I don't know if this is something that was unexpected, but I think one of the things, particularly with the case studies that we did, where we examined apologies that have been given for an actual human rights violation, of which one of them is the Jeju 4.3 case. I think what to me just comes home is just how valuable people do find it. both those from the victim community, the ones that the apology was actually addressed to, but also people in the wider public. They definitely valued the apology in and of itself, but it always felt that there was like a follow-up statement to that not enough had been done, or that there were things that were missing. And there are various reasons for that, and we can go into that. But I think that's one of the things that has really stuck with me from what we found.
That's fascinating, because I do, when I hear about these apologies, I always think that maybe they are just words, right? Like they're just tokens that are given. But I mean, no one's ever really like apologized to me, so I don't know how that would actually feel. And in the case of Jeju, you do talk to people. I remember interviewing people specifically about the apology too, asking what it means to you when particularly when the other apologies came out later. And they're like, the first apology, that was the one that covered everyone. Every apology that has come since doesn't really matter because that first one from Roe, right? And is that what you found?
Yeah, they see it as it's such a historical moment where a person on a national level, on an official role, acknowledges the suffering, the pain, the violence that happened, especially in a place like Jeju or in South Korean society where the violence that happened during that time has so long been neglected. That finally somebody acknowledges that that's so important. And also in El Salvador, which is the other case study, there's been also a lot of actually in all three case studies there's been denial and neglect of what happened. And in all three cases they talk about like a cloud that has lifted and a taboo that has been broken, and such a relief that finally somebody talks about this. That's extremely important.
Yeah, very much a sense of relief, because there's been such a long period of silence and suppression after something so horrible has happened, and then not being able to talk about it, and even being told, well, actually, it didn't happen the way it did, or you must have been guilty, or those who, the victims were guilty of something. So they are words. It is, like you were saying, Darryl, that it's, there isn't actually anything physical or tangible. It is a statement. They are words. But actually the symbolic meaning of what that represents, I think, is what makes such a difference in terms of the apology itself. And this first one after that long period of silence.
Yeah, it's such a like a way of, and to use modern word, is like the gaslighting is so extreme that Darryl did an interview way back in the day, and the woman said that, when the president gave his apology down here at the Jeju Peace Forum, they all burst into applause. And she said, prior to that, she couldn't literally even speak the words, out of her mouth. It was just not allowed. It was so taboo that you couldn't even talk about it when she knew it happened. She was there. She knew it happened. And
it's sometimes, I mean, on Jeju, that was less the case, but on the peninsula, where we also spoke to people from sort of the general public, and we asked them the same questions as on the island, like, did you know about the apology? What do you think of it? Was it the right person, right time? But some of them, it was quite difficult to find actually in participants to talk about this. The moment when they heard it was a political subject, they felt they were hesitant. They wanted to know more. They wanted to be sure, what is it exactly about? So that's actually, I think, quite exemplary of the situation that it's still in. Yeah.
And Marieke, we did like prior to our interview with you, we released a podcast, just like a primer, like an educational, what is 4-3 about? And Darryl and I talked about it. I also have found between traveling on the mainland, not only would people be hesitant, but people really didn't even actually know. There wasn't, it's not getting talked about. So how would they know about it? So when you're bringing this up or talking about it, however it would get brought up, there was just almost a blank slate on a lot of my friends' faces. Like, we have no idea about that, or we kind of know, but we don't know any details. So there's that too to kind of reckon with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we found that as well.
Right.
Yeah. So since we are talking about your work here, how long were you guys here for? Who did you speak to? What did your field work look like?
Oh, such great memories, actually. I can't believe that we actually were able to do that before there was even such a thing as COVID or a pandemic. So I think, Marieke, you can correct me if I'm wrong. We spent 2 weeks on the island of Jeju. Well, actually, before that, Marieke and Juliette came out and did about a week's worth of introductory kind of visits.
Yeah, we went to the commemoration in 2019. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then Marieke and I came back a couple of months later, and we spent 2 weeks on the island of Jeju. We lived for a week in Jeju City and then a week in Sogripo. But we had rented a car, and we ended up traveling all over the island to interview people. And then after that, we went and spent another 2.5 weeks or so, I think, in Seoul. And we interviewed people from the general public in Seoul and the suburbs, and also a little bit elsewhere around the country.
Were those well, I'm guessing not, because you just mentioned it, but how did you go about approaching people in both the island and the mainland? Was it set up? Was it, a microphone in your hands, going up to someone on the street? How was this all accomplished?
Do you want to go ahead, Marieke?
Yeah.
I'll let you talk.
This was also one of the reasons why Juliette, so the principal investigator, and I visited in April, was to go to the commemoration, because that was like a nice culmination, and also meet with our collaborators. So we set up a collaboration with the university in Seoul and Korea University. And there was a research assistant there that came with us to the island. And there we met with some people from the various associations there, the Jeju committee. And there we also met with Jimin Kim, who is one of our collaborators as well. And through her, we found, because we also needed translators, of course.
Yes, of course.
So we, through her and her contacts, we found translators on the island, because we wanted people from the island. And they helped us to find participants as well.
Okay.
So, and that was a bit through sort of snowballing, or through people from the committee or the association. We wanted, an even distribution with age, gender, education level as well. So we wanted also people not only from the city. So those kinds of things we kept in mind. And this is how we went about the island. And then we would interview them sometimes in their house, sometimes in a cafe, with a translator. So that sometimes was, you try to keep the flow of the conversation going as much as possible. And I think we did a good job, but there is some bits, of course, that makes it a bit difficult using a translator. Yeah.
But, I bet, yeah. And
it was such a nice experience, though. These people in Jeju were so nice. Yeah.
They really, Jeju people really are something special for sure. Yeah. So did Jeju people, were they more open and welcoming to this line of conversation than you found in Seoul? Was it an obvious difference between the two?
Yeah, I think for the most part, yes. I think a lot of them felt that, I think it was important to them that there was someone who was interested in this topic and was asking them these questions.
Yes.
So yes, they were definitely more welcoming compared to the peninsula. There was still some hesitation and fear, especially when among the older participants or interviewees, because of what we were talking about earlier about that fear and the stigma that still existed from all those years before that. So we did struggle sometimes to find people, particularly with it kind of among the older group that we were looking for. But overall, they were happy. They felt like, oh, somebody is interested in what we want, what we've experienced, and interested in this topic, and they want to hear what we have to say. And I think that was good.
Darryl and I have had that same exact experience many times, where it's just like, oh, you're American, and well, not for me, I'm American. Oh, and you know about this? Oh, and you want to hear about this? Yeah. So it's very interesting. Darryl looks like he's winding up for a question here.
I have some, yeah. Well, okay, so let's talk about the apology itself then. What did you learn from your studies about the specific apology from Roe?
Yeah. Do you want to go ahead, T, or?
Sorry, I just want to make sure I understand your question. So you want to know about the apology, or about what people thought about the apology? About
what people thought. Like, it's fascinating to me, like, because I guess there's two frames of way we could go about it. Is how you categorize the apology, and also how the apology was received by the people in as a whole, right? So I would like to know your findings. I kind of left it open generally to see what you guys would come up with.
Yeah. So maybe I'll say a couple of things, in the Marieke, about the survey, and then if you want to say a bit more about the interviews. So we did two studies, parallel studies. One was a set of interviews, and I'll let Marieke talk a little bit more about that. And then we also did a survey where we had a larger number of people answer questions on a questionnaire, and we asked them to evaluate what we called meaningful they found the apology, and how valuable they found it. So we asked them to rate, on a scale of 1 to 5, how sincere they felt the apology was, how satisfactory it was, how much honor, or how honorable it was, but also how important or necessary they felt it was. And we asked this because there is research out there that suggests that an apology is effective, or is more accepted, if it is seen to be more sincere, if it is seen to be, heartfelt and satisfies kind of what people are expecting in an apology. But we also were interested in understanding whether people felt that as a result of that, the apology played a role or had a function in leading to reconciliation or restoring honor and healing. Because, otherwise, what is the point of an apology, in a sense? And so that's another thing that a lot of people, scholars, look for. And so we were interested in understanding whether people felt that it had actually achieved this. And so we looked at this through this survey. Interestingly enough, what we found in the case of South Korea, I'm just looking at my notes to make sure that I say this correctly. What we found was that actually it was the people of Jeju, more than those in the peninsula, found the apology to be meaningful. So they were more likely to say, yes, it is sincere, it is heartfelt, it is satisfactory. And because they found it meaningful, they also felt that it had a function towards healing and reconciliation. Whereas when it came to their evaluation of it, in a sense, as being valuable, necessary, important, there wasn't as much of a difference between those on the island of Jeju and those in the peninsula. They were about equally in agreement in their evaluation of it as valuable.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I'll just leave it at that, and maybe we come back.
Okay. Wow.
Sure. Was there any difference between the South, like the different cities on the different sides on Jeju? When you said that, that's really fascinating.
Yeah, we didn't really test that, in a sense, or we didn't look at any differences. That would be interesting. We don't actually have the information because, we respect people's privacy, so we didn't necessarily ask them, where do you live, that sort of thing.
Right.
But that's a good question. It would have been interesting also to see whether there were differences between people who lived in the more urban areas, or whether they lived in the rural areas of the island.
Right. Yeah.
But we don't have that information. We haven't tested for it.
And Marieke, you did the interviews then?
Yeah, so we both did the interviews, and I'm working on the interview paper though. So that's I think why I didn't see. I was like, she can talk to.
Well, you've been delegated for it.
Yes, so the interviews were based on sort of the same premise as what Thia just discussed, and I think one of the interesting things is, like we just mentioned, apologies are seen as very significant. The acknowledgement, the public recognition, the first time, etc. So all these things, they're like overall in all three countries, for the general public as well as the victim community, it was extremely important. But you see some nuances between the countries, which I think might be interesting to talk about here. Is that you see, for instance, in the United Kingdom, which is one of our 3 case studies, they would talk a lot about the fact that through the apology, the victims were vindicated, that they were exonerated, that they were finally seen as innocent. While that was also something that was mentioned on Jeju, but on Jeju, or in the Republic of Korea, they would talk a lot about the importance of the restoration of honor and reputation. And many would speak about the healing of Han, which is, I think, a concept that's familiar to you. And that this taboo was lifted, that was extremely important, and something that we also discussed during that meeting that we had a couple of weeks ago, is that what we did find interesting is that in the UK and in El Salvador, they would speak about the fact that they would need prosecutions. Prosecutions is something that is something that would be a logic follow-up, but however, that's not something that they would speak about in the Republic of Korea. Actually, that's not, no. And we were like, okay, how is that? How come that they won't talk about this? And people during the meeting of a couple of weeks ago, they also said that this is because after Jeju 4.3, people on the island were still living together. So perpetrators and victims were still living on the same island and had to live together while this neglect and denial was still going on. So how can you ask for prosecutions when that's your everyday life? That was one of the answers we got from during the meeting a couple of weeks ago, and I found that very interesting. That's just that was not so prevalent in South Korea.
I found that too. That's actually something that personally kind of frustrates me about this, because I'm always wondering, like, okay, so what about prosecutions? What about, trying to find people who are guilty? Because I've interviewed some people and they would tell me, oh yeah, I can point out to murderers'
my
houses.
neighbor.
Where these people not necessarily still are, but where the houses that were ill-gotten through the massacre are, and all these things. And it just surprises to me that nobody ever talks about trying to get restitution. Well, restitution from the government, yes, but not like prosecutions or anything like that whatsoever, which is interesting. Like, it's fascinating that that's something that you guys also were looking at.
Yeah, or like that was one of the things that we wouldn't necessarily ask for it, but it was so interesting that in almost all interviews in El Salvador and in the United Kingdom they would talk about it, but in Korea they wouldn't. So that was indeed interesting. And I mean, I guess if it's been so widespread and so sort of omnipresent, the violence, and that afterwards it's been so neglected, you can sort of imagine, like, what do you do, right? So you start looking for ways where you can find where you can sort of get your grief recognized, and if that's not through court cases, then any other way that's possible, I imagine.
Did you speak or get any results back from people that just completely disregarded the apology from Roe by any chance, or anyone who said it wasn't impactful, or just who doesn't care about it or anything?
Yeah, on Jeju Island, there was one interview that I did with an older woman who, not so much that she did not recognize the apology, but she was probably the most skeptical of the massacre itself. That I think just her political leaning affected kind of how she viewed and understood the massacre, and therefore then the apology. And so it was actually one of the most difficult interviews that I had, because it felt like she couldn't get on board with the questions that I was asking, and I tried different ways to ask the questions, and it actually just went completely
real quick.
It was unexpected. I think that was the only one where we had this kind of reaction from someone on the island. We had a few more like that, I think, on the peninsula.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I wondered if that would have been the case if, if she maybe wasn't a Jeju native, but, you don't know that, but yeah.
Yeah.
You see that for the general public, there's just a lot more cynicism about the apology. So they would recognize that it's important and that it's an historical moment, etc. But they would also very often after that say, but what good does it do? It's been so long ago. Okay. Why would you reopen the wounds?
Yeah.
And then
they refer to other massacres as well. And they would say, what about,
what about it?
Refer to other massacres, indeed. Yeah. And they would also talk about the person. So President No, of course, they say, oh yeah, but he was a human rights lawyer. Of course he does it. Obviously he should have done it. And in the other countries, they would also always speak about whatever came after, and they would evaluate the apology based on the experiences they had afterwards.
Right. Yeah, I was wondering about that because there's been some things that have happened on the island that make me not question his apology, but it almost tarnishes it in some way, because there have been like the issues with the naval base, and then you find out, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Gangjeong naval base, but when you find out how the military actually brought the naval base here and like rigged elections and, like roughed up protesters, and like it's really underhanded when the report that came out a couple of years ago, and they apologized afterwards. Like President Moon came here and apologized for the naval base situation. And you're just like, well, I mean,
that's what not congruent with his actions. Yeah.
Or they're just going to keep doing this and apologize for it again in the future. That's so, which leads to the question that I wanted to ask. Sorry, Alexis. Is the cynicism in age groups? Like you talk to different age groups and stuff. So I was wondering how the older generation accepted that or perceived that apology compared to possibly younger generations.
That's interesting. We haven't. I haven't.
Yeah, we haven't really looked at the age group difference. Okay. I would say that the cynicism, the cynicism kind of increased throughout the interview, as people sort of did this meaning making of, what the apology had meant to them or how they evaluated it, and then as they kind of talked through, since then, what has happened. So like I don't remember which one of you said a moment ago, like all the time that has passed and things that have or have not happened since the apology was given. And this is something that we actually found in all three of our case studies, where although people found the apology to be quite meaningful, they recognize the value of it, because of maybe a lack of action, whether it is prosecutions or reparations or that sort of thing, because of the relative lack of action or just unsatisfactory action that had happened, the meaning of the apology was tarnished in a sense. Mm-hmm. And so I would say that's where I saw some of the cynicism. It was like within the participant as they were working through the interview and answering the questions.
That makes
I don't
sense.
know if you would agree with me, Marieke, on that. But that's something that I noticed.
Yes, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Well, and especially here in Jeju to talk about like the time of that apology, and Darryl's the date guy. I have a horrible memory when it comes to dates, but the time of the apology, and then for things to really actually for anything further to happen was an immense amount of time. And talking about reparations, even from the government, Darryl can probably pull that out of his hat. Like, when was the first talk of monetary reparations.
Well, the court
that was
case,
just like the court case that was just a few years ago.
yeah, I covered that in 2019. I have to look it up, but I think it was after you guys were here. Was
Right.
the first time that and it was only specifically for people who were wrongly convicted in mass
Right. And
court-martials. Right,
like
so that-
getting their names cleared finally and stuff. So I mean, imagine that. Like here you have this apology that you're super excited about. So when Thia, when you're talking about that, you know, like the way, like I could almost see it like going across their face, like this recognition of like, here, yes, this apology was this, and then as they're speaking it out and really, you know, sorting it in their brain, being like, well, now wait a minute, you know, how long has it been since that? So really interesting. Yeah.
Well,
just-
no, I was waiting for a question, but I wanted to make a
No, I
comment
just think it's so interesting.
said about just the just comment about President No and kind of how people have evaluated the apology in light of his character. That is something that we found, like in the survey that I was mentioning, we did ask people how much they trusted both the person that gave the apology and how much trust they had in the institutions, you know, like the government and the courts and the military or the army. And it was interesting to see how the level of trust did seem to have some effect on their evaluation of the meaning and value of this apology. And interestingly enough, when it came to the case of the Republic of Korea, and this is different from our other two cases, that there wasn't a difference between the people of Jeju and the people on the peninsula in their levels of trust of both the apologizing person, so the president, but also in the institutions. But it does say something, I think, about how the context, both the national context itself, but then also the context of who the person was and what happened after that, in terms of, you know, like in the case of President No and the things that we know about him, how that affected their evaluation of the apology itself. And that
As it
does
should,
make
yeah.
some difference. And I think it's important to keep that in mind when we ask people, you know, well, what do you think of this apology? There are so many factors that are involved, and particularly for, I think, people on the peninsula where they don't have that personal connection to the massacre itself, and they don't necessarily have all the information. They need to be able to evaluate it in light of other things that they may or may not know.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you guys have mentioned a couple times about you have 3 case studies, but so one case study is Jeju. What are the other 2 case studies? Just so we all know.
Context.
Yeah.
Yeah, so our other case, 3 cases are the apology given by David Cameron, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, for the Bloody Sunday massacre. That apology was given in 2010. And the third apology is given by former President Funes of El Salvador for the El Mozote massacre. So these are three apologies. They're all for massacres that happened during conflict or war, conducted by government or military, and in all 3 cases there was neglect and denial, like I mentioned before. So in a way, there's different reasons why we chose these 3 apologies.
I was wondering.
They turned out very well to be able to be comparable very well. I mean, obviously, you never can really compare war, conflict, suffering, but we wanted to be geographically spread, and we also wanted it to be an apology after 2000, so that we could speak to people that have a memory of the apology itself. And and we also actually were looking for apologies or massacres that haven't been researched that much yet. So yeah, these were some of the various reasons. It took us a long time to choose these case studies.
I bet. Yeah.
Yeah, we took them from our database, of course. And because we did such nice coding, we could be like, okay, which of the human rights violations do we see are very prevalent? Okay, this, and then, okay, so what's interesting? So these
back to that database that you formatted.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, I'd like to just go back, and this might not be something you have accessible right away, but when we were talking about, that you were trying to do different ages and genders, how many people did you interview? And was it always face to face?
127 people.
127 people, and that was all face to face.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the 127 is across the 3 case studies.
Okay.
Yeah.
Total.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
that's important. Okay.
Yeah, it was about 40 plus or minus in Korea, and then in the Republic of Korea, and then about half each in.
Okay.
So half on Jeju and half in the peninsula, and then the same with the other 2 cases.
And then
survey,
sorry. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then for the survey, again, it was about 300 or so per country. So about 150, 160 people from Jeju Island, and then another 160 or so from the peninsula.
Okay. And at that point, and I just wanted to go back, at that point, you were really trying to be clear about the that it was going to be a male this age, you had that picked out already, correct?
Yeah, so we had what we kind of call a stratified sampling approach, where we had a table in a sense, and we said, okay, we want to have this many people who are between the ages of 18 and 34, and then another however many between the ages of 35 and.
So you sort of divide them, right? So you have 20, and then you have 3 age groups, and then you have, so you sort of like, you keep on dividing the columns.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's good to know.
Yeah, no, I remember that from I had to research all these different models for, I kind of remember that stuff from master's days. Not really my forte. So the Jeju Massacre apology took 49 years to actually come about. Does the length of time from the massacre to when it is given, the apology, have any effect on it? Have you noticed in your research? This might be another question that you might not have the answer to, but I'm curious.
So just from the database, actually, we could see that it's usual. There's like 1% or something of apologies that have been offered by the person responsible. So the person who was in office. So that almost never happens. And then this is a very, very loose calculation, because it's obviously we had to calculate when did the human rights violation end, sort of. And in some cases, it's quite straightforward. And in other cases, it isn't.
Right.
But generally speaking, you can say that it takes a generation, about 30 years, before an apology is offered.
Oh, okay. So that's not uncommon.
So it's not uncommon, no. I mean, this is... Yeah.
No, continue.
Yeah, I mean, this is very long, of course. And not to say that this is not a sort of a justification for the fact that it takes so long, but it does show that it just takes time. And this is also one of the arguments, right, to not apologize, or excuses to not apologize, is that national leaders, they say, oh no, but we want all the facts on the table, and we don't know yet exactly what happened. So we need a fact-finding commission, or a truth commission, or an inquiry. And in all 3 cases, that's what happened as well. And that also takes time before it's established, and then it has to happen, and then a report needs to come. And I mean, for instance, in the United Kingdom, that took a very long time, the Bloody Sunday inquiry. But that's also something that's quite normal.
So I was thinking even putting the team together probably was something that could be drawn out as long as possible, okay, we're getting to that. We're going to pick these people soon to go, do this investigation. Yeah.
Yeah. And for the Jeju 4.3, there was, especially for that inquiry, there was already much discussion on how to name Jeju 4.3.
Yes.
And so these things, are so extremely important. But they also need to be decided if you're going to put things on paper. Also, when did it start, for example? Was it 1947 or 1948? So these things, they're very various, and they need to be thought out. Yeah.
You know what, Marieke, I never thought about that, because I have a little bit of impatience to the way, obviously, just the slowness of Jeju, but I've also have a little bit of impatience with the name. Like the various names about it. But hearing you just say that really just like, it was like a little light bulb moment. You just said, if you're going to put it down on paper, these things are important. And I've never thought about it like that. To me, I'm impatient with it. I just think, you know, it's happened. What are we debating about here? But now when you say it like that, I'm like, wow, light bulb. Really interesting, yeah.
And so I'm curious, when did you guys say the Jeju Massacre ended then?
Oh, this seems like a trick question.
Ended.
Like, because you said you had to put parameters on it, right? Like when, so what
we say 1954.
Okay.
September 21st then, that date, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. That's generally, because I find the more, because I've interviewed people from Iran concerning the 1988 massacre there. I've done a bunch of, for some odd reason now, just start writing about different massacres and trying to get those truths down. And I've noticed that in my work that massacres are intensely personal in a way, and that they don't end when the government says that
it does,
they end. So I was curious to see if you guys had found a different date or something like that. But we've kept you guys for so much longer than we had intended. And
in my head, I'm just like, gosh, I bet there's other things that they probably could really wow us with. But I think maybe if you guys were keen on it, maybe we could interview you guys again some other time in the future, you ladies.
Yeah.
Of course.
Is there anything else?
Really enjoyable.
Good.
Really.
Is there anything else that you'd like to remark?
I love to talk about my research. So yes, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, I can only imagine the amount of time, like, you heard Darryl say numerous times the word fascinating, but really, really, truly, like, I had no idea, I'm not an academic. I'm just a person who has an interest, and I happen to be living on this island. So to hear what academics are doing out there to study is just, like he said, it's so fascinating to me. We could talk to you for hours and just like pick your brains for all these things, it really, really interesting work. And I hope your studies continue to go well.
Thank you.
No, well, before we do go, I did want to ask, is there anything else that you'd like to remark about the Jeju apology? Anything of interest that we haven't covered? Any questions I should have asked?
Yeah, or something particularly interesting.
Uh-huh.
Well, I'm actually, because you see that, sorry, T, let me just start. You see that President Moon, of course, also apologized afterwards.
Yep.
And now that Korea has a new, or this Republic of Korea has a new president, I'm very curious as to whether he will visit the commemoration and how he will take up this this precedent from President No and Moon. I'm interested. Yeah,
that's a very good point, because before Moon, he was the second one to come here, right? Like it was No, then we had like 12 years or whatever it was, and then Moon.
12, yeah.
And then now.
And Moon's visit was quite the surprise. Like there had been talk about it, and there was rumors going around the island. And I think, Darryl, I might even message you. I said, I heard Moon's on the island. And Darryl's like, no, I didn't see that anywhere. And I was like, oh, I heard, like one of my girlfriends is an event planner, and she had just kind of said something. And I was like, oh, I think he's here. And then suddenly, you get him pulling into the Peace Park. And that was honestly a big deal for the island as well, having Moon come down.
Definitely.
I mean, and then this new conservative president, we'll see. I mean, already, well, this is just a whole nother subject, but he's already given up the Blue House and is moving his office into the military building. It's gonna be interesting. It'll be a fascinating few years. That's for sure.
I wouldn't be surprised if the prime minister comes down, because that somebody will come down.
I also agree that he wouldn't be coming. I do think he would send someone else besides himself. Yeah, but to be determined. We could be surprised, maybe.
And Thia, did you have something that you wanted to add about that you found?
actually, what I was thinking that I did want to say, I guess this isn't really along the lines of the apology itself, but more about our research. It's been very easy for us to just sit here and say, oh yeah, we found this and that, but we really couldn't have done this without our collaborators, the translators, the research assistants. I mean, we did the interviews face-to-face ourselves, but the surveys were done by our research assistants who went, and they met with people, and they, especially if there were people who couldn't read very well, they helped them answer the questions, they read them out. So there was a lot of work that went into this. And then
only imagine
the people themselves who actually were willing to sit down and fill out a questionnaire or sit for an hour and tell us about their life. We're really thankful, and thankful is such a simple word to use, but this is part of the value of research. They're part of it. Yeah,
agreed. I mean, just listening to you ladies talk, you can just get the sense of how much work, how much behind the scenes, like, so even just hearing all these facts that you're pulling out, everybody knows that that's just not coming out of thin air. Just the amount of work you guys are putting in is just really, really great.
And if people want to figure out more about the political apologies, they can go to your website, politicalapologies.com. And
we'll be posting it on our website for a quick link as well.
Yeah, we'll be spreading around, and they can follow them on Twitter at POLAPOL_TIU. I'll also put that on because there's a bunch of capital letters and all that kind of stuff. So but thank you both so much for coming on and spending so much more time than you committed to. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. Sorry about us rambling on and just picking your brains, but wow, we appreciate it. And I think our listeners will too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks.